The subtitle for the symposium today is "Where is the Line?" And as we've been talking about all day yesterday, and we'll spend a lot of time talking about today, that can mean a lot of things to different people. And our job isn't to decide where that line is. We're not, and also trying to say that we're naive enough to believe that there is some line, and it's all about everybody holding hands and singing Kumbaya around a campfire. And politics is a contact sport. But as I've been hearing these things, one of the things that jumps out is sort of the distinction between what happens in an election and then what happens during policy making. And I think we're going to have some really interesting discussions about that today. And some of you might be familiar with Herbert Humphrey's quote, and I'm going to paraphrase a bit, when he was talking about his 6-year tenure in the Senate, that 5 years are for God and 1 year is for himself, is the way that he sort of looked at that. And I think right now there's sort of a feeling that maybe that's creeping into all of the time. And the election cycles, and because of media and because of financing and all those things, maybe have changed, but at the same time we still need to be able to sit across from a table with people with whom we may have differences of opinion and try to bring the differences that we bring to that, whether it's differences in approaches or methodologies or philosophies, to try to come up with the best policy. And I think we've got some excellent people today who can speak to both how to do that, but also the challenges to do that. So with that, I'm going to introduce Provost of the University of Iowa, Barry Butler. And Barry's a former Dean of the College of Engineering here, and we've worked together, and I know Barry is very much a believer and a zealot, if you will, about the importance of interdisciplinarity. And as we've been talking about, that interdisciplinarity and bringing those different people together from an academic perspective sort of translates to the policy side. So, Barry?
Well, thank you and welcome, everybody. I want to also compliment those responsible for the political cartoons, Karen, and I think one other, if I'm not mistaken, Matt. But they're outstanding. It's enjoyable to read those in advance of the presentations. As Pete said, I really appreciate what his organization has been able to pull together. It's very, very relevant. Not only does the Public Policy Center conduct research that informs public policy, we as a university, our main mission here is to educate students. And when I meet with students early, when they're on campus, the first couple of days, I generally reinforce to them some of the very subject matter that's being discussed here in the next over the rest of the day and yesterday as well. We bring them here, and we have a lot of courses that make up their particular degree that they're pursuing, but we also try to strive to get them to understand that while they're here, there are a lot of non-class oriented attributes that they need to pick up along the way. And those things like being able to negotiate conflict and difference through open dialogue. Now, they do some of that in the classroom environment as well, and we try as hard as we can to bring that in. But we try to instill in them the importance of that, so when they leave, they're able to use that as they move forward in life and become leaders. Their capacity to solve problems, thinking them through using sound research, when they have those differences of opinion, no matter what the subject matter is, to be able to treat others with respect and integrity, and most importantly, the L word, I like to say, listening to other people. And I think that's all relevant to what we're discussing here. And what better person to open the session than a fellow professor and of course congressman who's been in the classroom for over 2 decades and knows that very well. As we move forward as an institution of higher learning, we really want our students to be able to leave here with those skills that they learn in their courses, but also the ability to negotiate what's going to be very, very difficult interactions with others in their lives, their professional lives, and hopefully those that enter public service will take a lot of that with them as well. So it's my pleasure to be able to introduce this morning's speaker. It's the ideal person. He's the ideal person for this particular session, Congressman Dave Loebsack. He's currently in his 3rd term in the United States House of Representatives, and he's a member of the House Armed Services Committee, where he works to uphold the safety of our troops the well-being of military families in the honor of our veterans. And I think it's appropriate this week that we recognize that as well. He's a member of the House Committee on Education and Workforce, and he's focused on job creation, workforce training, and access to excellent education at all levels. He's co-chairs a bipartisan rural education caucus. I think that's very important as well, which works to address the educational needs of students and schools in rural communities. Dave grew up in Sioux City, I think as many of you know, went on to earn his bachelor's and master's degree at Iowa State University, and then went out west to University of California, Davis, where he earned his PhD. As I said earlier, I think most everybody in the room knows he has 24 years at Cornell College in Mount Vernon, where he now is Professor Emeritus, and again is very, very familiar with the interactions with students in the classroom, and I think that's an important attribute to bring to Washington, D.C., particularly when you look at sort of the generational change as we bring that next generation up and move them into positions of leadership that Congressman Loebsack and others in the House and Senate hold. So please join me in welcoming Congressman Dave Loebsack to the podium. Dave?
Thanks, Barry. I really appreciate that. It is really good to be here today. I have my old-fashioned typed speech on top of the computer here. All right, so if I hit the wrong button, if I press down or something and something comes up that's not supposed to be there, just don't pay attention, all right? No, I do want to thank Barry for that great introduction, and Pete and Jean, the University of Iowa, for doing this today, as well as the University of Iowa Student Government, the lecture committee, all the sponsors of the symposium. I thought that when Barry said that having taught at Cornell College suited or prepared me well for being in Congress, he was going to make some comment about Congress acting like young adults, if not children. But he decided to be civil and nice and not take a swipe at Congress the way just about everybody else does nowadays, and I think deservedly so, by the way. That's my own view for what it's worth as well. I know it took a lot of work to put this thing on, and this conference and the idea that, we would be thinking about these issues right now, I think it makes perfect sense. This is a perfect time to be thinking about these issues. I'm going to go, when I go back to D.C. Tomorrow, as a matter of fact, we have a staff wedding over the weekend. Normally I'm here on the weekends, as you all know. But when I go back tomorrow and then next Monday when we go back into session for next week, I plan to talk about, as much as I can on an individual basis, talk about what you folks have been talking about the last day or so. And this is really absolutely critical. And I always risk sounding like a Pollyanna when I talk about these things, especially in the middle of the battle that is in Washington, D.C., and across this country in politics at the moment. It really is, in many ways, a battle. I like the historical perspective, and I know that Jim Leach, no doubt, had a historical perspective last night as well. He usually is very good at that, and I do appreciate the fact that you honored him, because that's well deserved as well. But I like to say that now that I'm not in academia any longer, and by the way, I do call myself a politician now. I fully embrace the pain, yeah, the congressman and a politician, Professor Emeritus, But I'm one of those, because I have so little time to read good books anymore, but I'm one of those, probably the last one to read the book that everybody else has read. So I'm reading John Adams by David McCullough. It's taken me longer than most because I don't have a lot of time to devote to it. But look, folks, I mean, you know that we have a historical perspective about these issues. If you look at the beginning of our republic, if you look at even when President Washington was our first president, and all the barbs and epithets and everything else that were thrown at him during his second term especially, and against John Adams, they called him a monarchist and all the rest. I mean, now that may seem tame, but at the time it wasn't very tame. It was like calling somebody really, really nasty things at the beginning of our republic. And there were a lot of publications out there that were vilifying one politician or another, going back and forth. So, this isn't anything new. What's going on now, that doesn't make it right, doesn't justify it by any means. And, I look back at the campaign that Jim and I had, and I know a lot of people look back at that campaign in 2006 and, wonder why can't it always be that way, right? We did treat each other with respect, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. I had Jim in class a few times before I ran against him. I had his district director as a student and stayed in touch with him after he was a student and during the time that he was working for Jim Leach. In fact, Gary Grant was his name, and he's still in the area. When 9/11 happened, I called Jim Leach's office, and I said, I want to get a flag from you. And I talked to Gary about that. And I said, I'll come get it. I want to display it outside my house. And Gary was running the office at the time. And I said to Gary, I'll come and get it. I know that you guys sell these flags. And he said, yeah, we have one left. I said, I'll come and get it. And he said, no, I want to bring it to you in Mount Vernon. That's what Gary did. He brought it to me. All right. That doesn't happen very often. We got a great staffer in Dave Lesh and others, but that was because I knew Gary and I liked him and he liked me and I liked Jim Leach as our congressman. I voted for him a number of times in the past, but then I ran against him and I was determined that this was not going to be a nasty campaign and all the rest, and I knew Jim wouldn't let it happen as well. We even had a story in the Los Angeles Times about us in October of 2006, which 14 people across the country probably read, right? Including in L.A., right? Because this was not the thing to do, and it still isn't the thing to do in some ways, unfortunately. I got to tell you, I couldn't agree more with what you folks are doing. All you have to do is turn on C-SPAN at night. I like to mention that when I first got to Washington, D.C., my wife Terry was with me one night there at our apartment, and I was flipping through C-SPAN, and some of my friends were on, right? This is a freshman class. Half of us are still there, Democrats, that is. And they were yelling, or not yelling, but they were going on and on about something, the Iraq War or something, I don't know what it was. And my wife Terry asked me, well, there's Paul, or she was noting, there's Paul, or why aren't you there, with them on the floor? And I said, well, because you're in Washington, D.C., and I'd rather be with you in the living room watching my friends, for one thing. That's a winner, by the way. When you're in politics, that's a real winner with your spouse. But the other thing was, look, I've been asked lots of times to go to the floor of the House of Representatives and rail against the other side about one thing or another, okay? I told the Democratic leadership, my leadership when I first got there, that the people in this district, they got used to somebody, who was pretty independent of the party, often at least. And I didn't intend to do anything any different because that's what the people of the 2nd District, I think, expected me to do. That doesn't mean that I don't have a 90% voting record. I am a Democrat, after all, okay? And the ideas out there, I'm a Democrat. I like the Democratic ideas far more often than I do the Republican ideas, okay? This isn't about disagreeing about the issues, but it's about how to disagree. And I have told folks over and over, and they almost never ask me now, go down and do this 1-minute speech at the beginning of the day, right? And they always have a theme. Each party has a theme. I've done that a few times, but then I've gone down to the floor and I've done my own thing, all right? That's relevant to the district, relevant to Iowa. They kind of quit asking me to do that now, because, I don't necessarily do what they want me to do by any means. But at night is when they have the special orders, and this is when anyone can go down there for an hour, organize an hour with his or her colleagues, and often it's railing against the other side. That's all it is. Not always, but often. And I've done it one time in the 5 years that I've been in office, and I did it because at that time we were debating who was going to get the tanker contract, Boeing or Eads. And Rockwell Collins would benefit no matter who was going to get it, but I thought Boeing was better than Eads. They finally did get the tanker contract, and it was going to be very beneficial to the 2nd District because of Rockwell Collins' role in that contract as well. I thought it was the right thing to do, and it was a good thing to do for the district. So I went down and spoke for 5 minutes. That's the only time that I've done special orders at night. That's why when you turn on C-SPAN at night, oh gosh, I never see Dave. Where's Dave? Well, my own view for what it's worth is that it just doesn't serve a purpose for me to go there. if I could go there and speak about things that are important to the 2nd District and to Iowa, then I would be more inclined to do it. But in the meantime, that's not what happens, often, I should say. So that's something that, I just don't have a great desire to do. I do speak on the floor of the House, but I speak on the floor as it relates to things that I've introduced or issues that are relevant to the 2nd District and what have you. Yes, I was critical of the war in Iraq, but I tried to do it in a argumentative way, certainly making an argument, but not in a way that was trashing the Bush administration and on and on and on. I may not have succeeded 100%, but that's what I tried to do. Again, I know some people think I'm a Pollyanna when it comes to these things, but it's also who I am. It's just not my thing. I mean, there are going to be times, and there have been times when I'm very critical of the other side. But again, it's where is that line really? But also, what I'm hearing from folks, out there in the midst of all this incivility and all the rest, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I keep hearing from folks that people just want us to bridge those gaps. They want us to get along, at least long enough so that we can address the major issues facing the country. And that, we can talk about all of this in and of itself, the issue of civility and all the rest. But for me, ultimately, it's also all about making sure that we as politicians, as members of Congress or state legislatures or whatever, that we can put down the arms long enough, we can come together and do what we're supposed to do, which is move the country forward. And that may even include people coming together who don't like each other on a personal basis, because we're not going to like each other all the time. That's all there is to it. I'm sure there are some members of the House of Representatives who, for whatever reason, don't like me personally. And okay, that's fine. If that's the case, I can accept that. But if we have some idea, some common ground that we can reach to move the country forward, move our districts forward, our states forward, whatever, then let's put that aside and work on that. And I mean, I'm going to give you a couple examples, not where I disliked someone personally, but where I have worked with the other side of the aisle this year. I got to tell you, when when this year began and Democrats lost control of the House of Representatives, the first expectation is, I'm a Democrat, I'm in the minority. My chances of getting anything done are pretty slim, right? Especially given how polarized things are, and the other side's going to have their ideas. We have our ideas, I have my ideas, whatever the case may be, and my ideas aren't going to be probably very similar to their ideas, and I'm in the minority, and therefore it's going to be difficult to get anything done. It is difficult when you're in the minority. It's just structurally. That's the way it works. I'm not in the majority party who controls the committees and the subcommittees and what have you. But at the same time, because over the course of the last 5 years, I've tried to do everything I could to work with the other side of the aisle on issues big and small, I think I've developed some relationships on the other side of the aisle that have been helpful. One of them, you all remember when the president was giving his State of the Union address a couple of years back, and Congressman from South Carolina stood up and yelled, "You lie." We all remember that. That's Joe Wilson from South Carolina. I will tell you, it was a shock to me, as it was to virtually everybody in the House, that Joe was the person who did that. We didn't expect Joe to do that. He's also on the Armed Services Committee, which is one of the committees in which I serve. He's chair of the Military Personnel Subcommittee, which deals with matters related to personnel, but health benefits and all the rest, pay, that sort of thing. This year, when we were considering the National Defense Authorization Act, which we do every year, I introduced a bill that would embed a mental health professional in every Guard and Reserve unit around the state of Iowa, around the country, when they get together for training drills, what have you, in part to try to deal with the high suicide rate that we see in the military, especially in the Army, especially in the reserve units. Half of the suicides happen before deployment, okay? Well, I had talked about mental health issues and my mom struggling with mental illness. I always talked about that. And these issues are really important to me and to the people here in the district. And Joe had heard me talk about that. And Joe came to me and told me about his own personal family situation, and we had a wonderful conversation about that. And then when I introduced this bill, as it turned out, Joe helped me incorporate this bill into the larger National Defense Authorization Act of this year. That started because we had a personal relationship. That started because we respect each other and like each other. And it ended with my bill being incorporated into the larger bill. That's something that we can do. I'm not saying I can do that in every instance, but it's something that I think we can do. Bobby Schilling across the river and across the party divide over in Illinois. He beat my friend Phil Hare last time around. But I hope to represent the Quad Cities area on the Iowa side, Maggie. And I hope to do that after the next election. And to do that, I have to take into account, obviously, the important issues facing those folks now and in the future. One of those really important issues is the future of the Rock Island Arsenal. It's technically in the middle of the river. It's technically in Illinois, but that's a region, as Maggie and others know, and are thinking of themselves more and more regionally. So Bobby and I have gotten to know each other quite well across the aisle, across the river, and he's on armed services, and we're fighting like heck to make sure that we can maintain the organic manufacturing base that is there at the Rock Island Arsenal, because if we do have future conflicts, we're going to need that. We're going to need to build howitzers, whatever the case may be. We don't want to have more conflicts, but we have to be prepared in the event that we do. So Bobby and I are working on that. We're getting legislation passed in the House, starting in the Armed Services Committee, that would make sure that we do what we can to maintain that organic manufacturing base. And, oh, by the way, it's going to help the economy maintain, maybe create more jobs in the future as well. So that's an example of how we can do this. And then Bobby and I, we were working on other issues as well. He introduced a bill that had, at the time, only Republican co-sponsors, that would defer any retirement benefits that I might receive or any member of Congress might receive until our normal retirement age, because that's not the case now, okay? Until, in my case, 66, all right? I'm the first Democrat to get on that bill and co-sponsor that bill that Bobby had out there. And that came out of our dealing with each other and relating to one another and getting along with one another and working together on issues. I'm not saying this is the answer. I'm not saying this is the end-all and be-all. I'm not saying this is going to solve the problem of the super committee and coming up with upwards of $1.5 trillion in deficit reduction over the course of the next 10 years. But what I'm saying is that I think we need to celebrate the small victories when we can have them. And what I'm doing with the other side now, what they're doing when they come to me, I think is at least to some extent a culmination of small efforts on the part of some of us over the course of the past few years to come together. And whether it's socially in the Center Aisle Caucus or the new Common Ground Caucus, or on issues and indicating a willingness to work with the other side, that's I think the best way forward on this. Bobby and I tease each other, but we never say bad things about each other in public. We give each other trouble personally all the time, you know. We become friends. That's how it is. People don't know what we're saying to each other when we're at the Rock Island Arsenal, you know, and people are out in the audience. You know, you don't want to know. We're just kidding. But we're teasing each other, but we're also working on, you know, how we can move things forward. Again, I'm not Pollyanna, as I said. I know I've said that a number of times already. This is not easy. This is difficult. We're gonna have a lot of difficulties this next election, especially. But I'm here really to listen to you too and hear what your thoughts are. But I'm willing to take any questions. I'll stay as long as you want me to stay. I'm quite serious about that. All right. There are other things I need to do today, but thank you for having me today, and I hope those remarks were something that you wanted, Pete, and appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thanks a lot. Yes, sir.
Knowing how important money is to a campaign,
yeah,
also all the time, how do you avoid a strategy that spreads fear and loathing about the enemy?
Good question. Well, how do you avoid a strategy that spreads fear and loathing about the other side? Did you say the enemy? I guess. Right. Yeah. Well, often it's perceived that way, that's for sure. Hey, look, the National Republican Campaign Committee has run 2 ads against me. When they ran the second one against me, I put out an email asking my supporters for support. Okay. They're coming after me and on. But I didn't, I'm not trying to instill fear and loathing, you know, into my, most of my supporters probably already don't think a lot of the National Republican Campaign Committee, right? But I think that's a great question. How do you do what you have to do to win without thoroughly demonizing the other side, without engaging in scare tactics and fear tactics and all the rest. I will talk about how, I mean, look, there's legitimate debate. If the other side, in your race offers something that you honestly believe is going to hurt seniors or is going to do, take away from Social Security or Medicare or whatever the case, then it's perfectly legitimate to talk about that. There's no doubt about it. It's how you talk about it. It's how you talk about the other side, how you portray the other side. And people on both sides of the aisle, I think, do this incorrectly and do it in unacceptable ways. There are people on my side of the aisle, I don't appreciate some of the things that they do, and likewise on the other side. But it is a fine line, and we have to make that decision ourselves when we do those commercials or when we put out those emails or whatever. We all have a certain comfort level. Some of us have a bar that's higher than others when it comes to those kinds of things. In my first campaign, I made it very clear that, for instance, that I didn't want anybody to talk about Jim Leach's wealth. I just didn't want that to happen. And when one of the press releases went out and talked about that, I literally fired the person who was responsible for that. I just didn't want that to be the case, for a lot of reasons. Again, I'm not pure, I'm not 100% perfect, not by any means, because you can probably look at some of the things that I've done since I've been in office, and you can probably say, oh, he's not holding himself up to his own standard, 100%, and that may very well be the case. But I don't have a good answer to that, other than each individual has to make his or her own decision in many ways too. Did you want to add anything to that? Okay. But it's a constant struggle. There's no doubt about that. Dave Les just put his hand up, but I know that he doesn't want to ask a question. If he does, I'm not going to call on him. Barry?
I was going to call a little bit on your academic background, but sometimes when I watch on BBC the British Parliament and the sort of conversations that go back and forth, it's theatrical, but if you just read the script and you were to put that into our Congress, those are some of the fighting words. I mean, you listen to the thing, but yet it comes across in a way that's almost part of the theater of Parliament. Any comments on that, or other sort of governments and how they, address their dialogue and how they interact with one another?
Well, first of all, there have been many times in the past when I really would have liked to have that question time and had our president come before Congress and engage in that give and take. Some would have done it better than others, and I won't mention any names either way. But I think that's a great idea. I mean, the press corps sort of serves as Parliament at the moment when it comes to the question time. But, there is a tradition there. That's the thing. There is a tradition. And that's a big part of it. We don't have that kind of tradition here in this country. We have the back and forth. And, actually, there's a lot of, when people say my good friend on the other side of the aisle, I mean, that's less the case than it used to be. But it often is the case. People are not kidding when they say that. And then they go into these, diatribes and sometimes personal attacks and all the rest. There are limits on the floor of the House to what we're supposed to say and how we're supposed to say it. And sometimes words have to be taken down, if you will. And that makes perfect sense to me. And there have been times since I've been in office, a couple of times when members of my party went on the floor and said some things that I thought were totally unacceptable. And I told them that. And a couple of them were older, more senior members, and I thought at the time that could have some negative blowback on me, but I didn't care. And so I just said it to them. I didn't know I say it in the nicest way either. I'm the first to admit, in private conversations. But I would like to see more of that here, but we don't have a parliamentary system. That's the difference, right? We have a more presidential system. We don't have the same kind of structure of government that they have there. I would like to see the president does that once in a great while, but it's behind closed doors when he would go to either a Democratic caucus or a Republican caucus. Although you wonder if anything is really behind closed doors anymore, because when we have these caucus meetings and then within an hour, the Hill newspaper, thehill.com, has what we talked about. Or in the case of the president meeting with the Republicans, Eric Cantor or somebody goes out and talks, well, this is what was said, and on and on and on. But I think it would be really important for transparency and for democracy to have more of that, more public. I think it would be a great idea, but recognizing that we don't have the same structure that they have there in that sense, too.
We've got time for one more question.
Is there not times when what is in the best interest of the second district is not in the best interest of the entire country?
That's a great question. And that's an issue that every one of the 435 members of the House has to struggle with a lot. Not all the time, but a lot. Are the interests of when, if ever, do the interests of the second district conflict with the interests of the country? Look, I can't answer that always very specifically, because within the second district, which now comprises 15 counties, but with the new redistricting will consist of 24 counties. And it's assuming at the outset that I can figure out what the interests of the second district are in every instance, right? But as I tell folks, when the trade vote came up, for example, right? Hey, look, I understand free trade. I understand David Ricardo and all that. I get all that. Aggregate welfare, winners and losers and blah, blah, blah. All that, academically and otherwise. But I'm in the real world, and I have to think about the multiplicity of interests. No offense to the economists, all right? Okay, when I said I'm in the real world, okay. But this isn't theoretical. It's actual. It's real world. There are people in the second district who will benefit from free trade agreements. There are people who will be harmed by free trade agreements. My point is that I don't know that on any given issue there's always a second district interest. There are multiple interests. So I have to take that into account. Every congressperson has to take that into account. Some districts are much more uniform, much more coherent and cohesive in terms of the interest than others. And the second district of Iowa, as it's now constituted as it will be constituted, is pretty darn diverse. Where we are is not the same as Davis County, Bloomfield, Davis County, Iowa. It's much, much different culturally, economically, and what have you. So in the first instance, I'm not sure that we can actually figure out what the second district interest is relative to the nation's interest. But I have to be thinking about those things all the time nonetheless, because I am in Congress and I represent the country as well. But one example of where I struggled with that, and public opinion should inform me in part as to what the second district interest is, or our interests are, because I'm representing the public. When it came to the so-called Wall Street bailout or the rescue package or whatever, I was not sure that the second district wanted me to vote for that rescue package. I was not sure. I didn't do a poll, but I was not sure about that at all. In fact, I thought that if I'd done a poll, maybe they wouldn't have been in favor of it. But I thought it was the right thing to do for the country. Ultimately, I thought it was the right thing to do for the people of the second district, because if the financial system in America and maybe even around the world had collapsed, I thought there would be tremendous negative effects in the second district of Iowa as well. So it's complicated. There's no good answer to that question. And again, I'm not trying to avoid the question, but it's not easy to answer that question, and that's something that we have to struggle with all the time as members of Congress and representatives to the best of our ability of our individual districts. So, thank you. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thanks.